All right, welcome back to our Fanalyst interviews. Thanks for checking us out on the Fanalyst YouTube platform. I'm Ethan Skolnick. You can follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick and at 5 Reasons Sports. And this guy has been a guest on 5 Reasons Sports, but he's got his entire platform that he has developed over the past few years. And he's part of a kind of what I call a different kind of new category of Fanalysts, which are the real X's and O's guys, the people who understand how the game should be played, break it down, and this whole kind of coach subcategory that has developed here over the past few years. So I want to introduce you to Coach Nick. You can find him on Twitter at B-Ball Breakdown. That's B-Ball Breakdown, breaking down everything in the NBA and around basketball. And let's just start here before we get to what you're doing now. What is your background for people who don't know it?
Okay, well, thanks for having me on, Ethan. I appreciate it. Let's see here. My background in basketball is, well, I guess if you go to the very beginning, I was a basketball manager at the University of Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. So for 2 years, I was able to be in practices and just study how to coach from guys like Stu Jackson was the head coach for the 2 years I was there. Stan Van Gundy was an assistant coach. Sean Miller was another assistant coach. Ray McCallum and so on. So that was a really good basis. I mean, I played basketball at a pretty high level at the high school level, and I was going to play like D3 until I, visited Wisconsin and fell in love with it. And then from there, I was a coach. I coached at my old grammar school. I coached my old high school. I coached at a really big inner city high school in LA for several years and was ultimately the head coach there for 3. So I built all this sort of knowledge about coaching. And out of that, by the way, I had brought the triangle offense from Chicago growing up, watching it when the Bulls playing, to the high school program I was at when I was an assistant there. And that kind of led me to meeting Tex Winter, who was the assistant coach at the time with the Lakers. And he became a mentor of mine, spent a lot of time with me there. And that was sort of the genesis of really understanding the history of the game into the X's and O's and how to coach. So all those things kind of mixed in together and then got me kind of where I am.
And all right, as you're doing this, though, I mean, were you working in other lines of business or were you just pursuing the coaching angle?
Sure. I sort of resisted basketball for a long time, even though I was much more passionate about that than anything else. So I was, working on films and commercials in Chicago out of college first, and then I moved to LA to continue doing that. And also I was doing some acting and performing and that kind of stuff. So the funny thing was that I would, I was writing screenplays, and that was a real big focus of mine for a lot of years. But I always felt like I'd play like a pickup game and walk out of there feeling just so much more passionate about that than even the writing, which I really was passionate about. And I resisted that for a long, long time until, the YouTube thing kind of came along. Well, actually, let's scratch that. I had my own company as a video editor, and I was doing a lot of sort of high-end event videos and industrial stuff like that. And I was kind of getting, bored with that as well. And then that is when the head coaching job opened up and allowed me to kind of get back into coaching, which also coincided with the YouTube channel launching almost at the same time. So I had, been wandering away from basketball for a lot of years, which is almost too bad because those years were like 2003 until 2009. So I kind of missed like the 7 seconds or less Suns. I mean, I watched it to some degree, but I wasn't really in tune with a lot of what was going on in the NBA then, which is lamentable because we missed so much great basketball then that I would have loved to have been really, watching live every night.
Well, you jump back in for the Big 3 Heat, so that's fine. That's what we care about down here in Miami because that was 2010. All right, so as you're doing this and you're in the coaching space, but you're pursuing other things, like you mentioned, the YouTube boom starts, and now we've seen this, not to completion, but to fruition to a certain degree, where there are so many of these channels that have popped up. So how did you sort of make the decision you were going to start a channel, and how did you grow it? Because I think that for a lot of people in this space, that's the challenge. Maybe they have good content, but letting people know about that content.
Okay, well, just, being an OG out here, it might not be the same path now as it was 11 years ago in 2010 when I started in May. But so I was floundering around. I was doing these videos, and I was doing a good job. I just wasn't satisfied professionally with that. And I believe my dad had actually came up with the idea first, like do something with coaching on YouTube. And I was like, okay. And I had a buddy who at the time in 2010 was representing a number of these YouTube stars. And there were probably at that time maybe like 30 or 40 people who were making like 6 figures a year on YouTube. It was a Wild West, just making, content of selfie videos and whatever. So he wanted to reverse engineer what they learned from them to help me from right from the beginning get this thing off the ground. Well, it turns out most of the things that he had advised me with didn't work at all, because he was like, it doesn't matter what it looks like, what it sounds like, because these people were all handheld selfie videos and it sounded terrible, whatever, but they were nailing a lot of views and making a lot of money. But it turned out with me, like, let's see, the first thing I noticed, it was I started a little bit, I had no idea what I was doing. They're out there. You can watch the original videos, the first few, and I wouldn't if I were you, but they're up there. And, they didn't look good. The background was terrible. My hair was as bad as it is today, if we're not worse. And what finally started catching on at first was when I put a green screen behind me. Okay, not even knocking it out, just put the green screen. Now remember, I was also doing video production for a lot of years before that, so I had all the production skills and I had the nice cameras. I had all the green screen stuff if I needed it. So I started to do that, and I noticed an uptick there right from the beginning. And then when I knocked out the green screen and put like a more professional looking cool background, then I saw another big jump. And then finally, when I went to HD, because back then, remember, HD wasn't prevalent all the time in 2010. When I went to HD full time, I saw another big jump. And these were very specific. You can trace it to those things. And so what it told me was that in the sports realm, in basketball, NBA, sphere, they want it to look as high end as possible and has to sound as good as possible. It needs to sound, as good as or better than what ESPN was producing back then. So once I started doing all those things, that's when I saw, people coming back and subscribing and getting a lot more views.
You're making me feel bad now about my lack of a green screen back here. So by the next Fanalyst interview, I promise, I'm telling this my friends over at Fanalyst, I'll have something done here. But social media too, like you had to use that as well, because it's not enough just to have a YouTube channel. I mean, people have built YouTube channels without social media, but it certainly helps to be able to promote it. So was Twitter your primary vehicle for that?
Well, I mean, in the very beginning, it was only YouTube. I was late to Twitter or to NBA Twitter, at least to my standards, because it had been going on for a while and I had been kind of monitoring it, but never really dipped my toe. And part of the reason is in the very beginning, I would do analysis of a play, but like just the text of a tweet, like how do you know what that play was? And you have to remember it. If we're all watching at the same time, great, it would kind of work. And you know what? It wasn't terrible. I was getting decent interaction there. But when I finally started saying, wait a minute, I could actually like take a screenshot of this or video this and then attach it to a tweet and then offer the analysis, that was huge. That became the big catalyst of growing the Twitter feed, which, by the way, they're completely different. And for a long, long time, there would be people on YouTube watching me who were not on Twitter and vice versa. And they would discover me on other platforms much later. And it was always a strange thing to me because back, for a long time, maybe from 2010 till 2015, again, they were like separate platforms and people didn't often have both. But once I kind of solved the issue of I'm going to provide analysis, I'm going to provide value to these tweets, and I'm going to add the video so you can actually see what's happening there, that's when they started getting shared a lot more, get a lot more followers. And then I can leverage some of that audience on Twitter over to the YouTube side, because obviously that's where the money is when you're trying to generate revenue from these videos on YouTube. So because obviously there is no money on Twitter. It really, the ROI there is rough considering how much time I spend on it. But there's a credibility thing there. There's a cachet thing there. And, you can draw eyeballs to YouTube from Twitter. It's not impossible. But either way, it also becomes a nice workshop for me where I can, try out some ideas and see how they do before I make a video.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, the audiences in many ways are still different. They don't cross over as much as people would think. I think there's an assumption from those of us who are on Twitter all day long, every day, that everybody's on Twitter all day long, every day. And the reality is a lot of people check their Twitter feeds, if they even have them, once every couple of weeks. But, and so we end up there's a feedback loop where you're communicating with a lot of the same people all the time. And you assume that that's what people want, but it may not necessarily spread out that way. I want to get to how this has changed the NBA to a certain degree. And I'm not talking about your account specifically, but it's part of it. This sort of revolution of X's and O's, because I felt like, covering the NBA myself from mainstream outlets since 1996, that at first it was very much based on what the coaches and the players told you. That essentially that was it. That you took their word for it. You quoted them. You wrote a story. Lead, quote, transition paragraph, quote, get on to the next day. And that also allowed the teams to kind of I wouldn't say hide stuff, Nick, but kind of not tell you the whole story, because the assumption was the reporter was not really smart enough or in tune enough or studying it closely enough to really figure it out anyway. So like Pat Riley could have told me anything the first 10 years about what was right or wrong with the Heat, and I would have believed him, or at least I just would have written it down. But then we saw the analytics craze start in the NBA, and also then the strategy craze, the why things are happening. I don't think anybody who was covering the NBA 20 years ago had any idea what a Spain pick and roll was, okay, or anything along those lines. Now people do. How much have you seen it change? And do you think it's changed the way that teams put out information now as well?
Well, interesting about the team question, but the bottom line is it certainly has changed. And I guess like I can't take credit for. I don't know how much I could take credit for, but certainly the term Spain pick and roll, for instance, is that was me. That was me and Adam Spinella did a video. Right. He was the guy who called it Spain. It should have been Spanish pick and roll. So I don't know how we got there anyway, because that's the correct verbiage or whatever. But at any rate, I mean, yeah, you're right. There was no. Here's the reason why I started my channel to begin with was in 2009, the Celtics and the Bulls played an epic 7-game first-round series. But I was like, this is some terrible defense on like Ray Allen, for instance, who's just demolishing the defense. And like everyone wanted to revel in like the epicness and how dramatic it was, which it was. But it was like, this is not really the best basketball, and someone should try and explain that. And that was really the genesis of it. And so when I started to do that, like, of course, as this has gotten bigger, what's interesting is that I've had like assistant coaches who I've become friendly with tell me, like ownership would come down and like start demanding, why are you running horns so much, or this and that, whatever. And it's like, there's no way they would have known what horns was. Now, horns is another one of my pet play things that I I think put on the zeitgeist of NBA Twitter as well. And so there was a notion at some point where, like, with great power comes great responsibility, because some of the coaches were yelling at me saying, like, we have jobs, we have families, and like, if you're going to light us up like this, it makes it really hard. Like, because then the ownership will see it, and then they might, without a lot of extra context, just get upset about stuff. So right. I realized that at some point in the last like several years, and tried to be a little bit more fair in my analysis, because there is a way to drive the narrative. Just like the media would drive the narrative based on what the coaches were telling them in the 90s and 80s and 70s, right? But now these people like me can kind of drive the narrative a little bit. So I have to be a little bit careful and make sure I know what I'm talking about before I, light something up in a video. But it's been a revolution. I can remember talking to older coaches back in 2010, 2011, who were so upset about analytics and thought it was such a waste of time, and it's just too much information. We can't give these players this information, which is true. You don't want to do that. And we can get into that later if you want, about how you're properly supposed to use analytics and then coach. Right. But at the very least, it's changed. Obviously, look at any shot chart from 2010 versus now, right? There's almost no mid-range. It's all the rim or all threes. And it's made the game like more efficient. And I think what was also the problematic was it made it vanilla, and everyone was playing the same way. And we were seeing it in the ratings the last several years. It's changed a little bit this year, I think. And there's a big reason why. And I don't think anyone would have thought why, if you look at it, take a step back and look at it.
That's fascinating. I mean, I think, well, if you do this, before we move on to the next part of this, for somebody who doesn't know what it is, what is a Spain pick and roll? How would someone like you describe it in the clearest terms possible for the total layman NBA observer?
Great. Thank you for the softball, because I'm well versed in explaining this one. You set a pick and roll on top, normal. It's 4 guys involved in that. Well, you take a third offensive player, and he sets a back screen for the ball screener's man. So in the past, there would have been a little bit of coaches wouldn't want to run a pick and roll, because now you got 4 guys around the ball and it gets all crowded there. I mean, obviously in the NBA, they're great. They can handle that. But now you're adding 6 players into this cacophony in the middle of the lane. But what normally happens is the guy setting the back screen on the ball screener's man will pop out to the 3-point line. And invariably, when the ball handler starts going to the basket, it causes so much confusion that usually it's that 3-pointer, that guy open there who can get an open shot. But a lot of times it's so much confusion that everyone kind of runs to the roll man, and then the ball handler just goes in for a layup. Rarely do I see the roll man get the ball on this one, interestingly enough. He's got to take one for the team and just be the good soldier. But at any rate, it's adding a third player into that. And we're seeing some of the most creative ways of getting into this now. I said on the top you'd run it. Well, I just watched Memphis run a Spain pick and roll on the wing, and it was gorgeous. And by the way, it got the roll man wide open, Steven Adams, the first play of the game against the Lakers, for a dunk. So it's a really valuable play. The Suns ran it all the time with Cam Payne.
Campaign, yeah.
When Chris Paul went down, and that campaign was like looking like an all-star out of that action a lot. So it's a devastating thing for the defense.
It's a lot more interesting than a player just saying we're taking it one day at a time. I want to get to this with you. Who are the others? Like, who are the others that, because so many of the people in my space that have come with me at 5 Reasons or others that I've talked to for this project, they talk about your work and the work of others as being inspirational, that you could cover a team in a different way. You could tell them the why things were happening instead of just the who and the what and, the injury updates and all that, but actually explain what was going on in the court. Are there others in the space that you admire, that you follow, that you would recommend?
Oh, now you want me to give my competitors some shout outs? I mean, this is an interesting space because there still nobody really does what I do, really, for the most part. Coach Daniel was a kid who was doing a lot, was watching my videos and then kind of applying the same analysis to what he was seeing. And I got to tell you, that he did well enough where the Mavericks hired him. And so now he's doing something similar for the Mavericks, which is an amazing story. And he's in LA. We've had lunch. He's a great kid. Excuse me, he's not even a kid anymore. He's probably in his mid-20s. There's the guys like J. Kyle Mann over on The Ringer, and you have Ben Taylor, who is he's LG on Twitter, but Ben Taylor does Thinking Basketball. And Ben Taylor's probably closest to me. J. Kyle Mann will do sort of the Ringer version, which is going to have some pop culture stuff in there too, and a little bit more fun. But from the sheer X's and O's and really diving deep into the footwork and the fundamentals, there just aren't too many other guys that do that coming off the top of my head. And either I'm lucky enough that I was doing it long enough where it's just been I could, I get more views than most of those guys, I guess, from longevity, I'd imagine. But also because I'm just doing something a little bit more detail oriented and more focused on the real fundamentals and the X's and O's. Because there's guys like Jimmy High Roller who destroy anything I do out there, but he's the one who does the kind of conspiracy type video stuff. Oh, and then there's obviously Mike Korzemba, who is the king of that as well. So those guys who do the conspiracy NBA videos with the deep dives that don't really do X's and O's, that's probably where you get even more bang for your buck. It might take a long time to make those videos, but those just destroy it and get millions of views. And that seems to pique a lot more interest to a lot more fan base. I'm a bit of a niche, but the niche is pretty big and it's been growing.
All right, so give it to me. What was your number one viewed video that you've ever done on your YouTube channel?
Oh wow! What's funny? I think it probably still is a video I did on the court, because remember, for a long time I tried to do videos of me, teaching stuff, and they never did anywhere near as well as the NBA stuff. Well, except for the one I did on NBA shooting secrets, and this is I wouldn't even recommend it that much because I changed some of the fundamentals. This is back in 2011, maybe I did it, but we talked about the hop and we talked about the turn and the sway and all these different things that are modern, takes on the jump shot. That got 3-4 million views, and for a long time it was the number one watch video per month going for years. It was even though it had been released years after or years before. So that's probably the most watched one. In terms of NBA stuff, I would imagine it might be one I don't know, maybe the one about Isaiah Thomas when you remember when Billy Hoiberg called out Isaiah Thomas in the playoffs for carrying the ball all the time.
Yes,
it's rare that you get that where an NBA coach will call out another player on their team. So I did one of those, and it was a deep dive. I think that might be one of them up there for sure, but probably one about LeBron is in there too. The usual suspects. Yeah,
the usual. So just to give people some perspective here, how many subscribers do you have in your YouTube channel now?
What's interesting right now is you'll see a lot of YouTube channels that have 100,000 subscribers, but are nailing 200,000 views each video. So this is a weird thing about subs that has changed over the years. But I'm at 125,000 right now. But and anybody can see this is not a magic or a hidden information. My subs are terrible now. I don't get hardly any subs anymore. And my views can stay the same or go up, and that's all I really care about. But I'm at about 825,000, and and it grows. But it's based on the past, in the years past, I would have been 1 million easy by now. So it's really slowed down, and I just feel like part of it is the way people consume YouTube now. Is I just feel like people don't subscribe as easily as they used to do it anyway back in the past.
Final question after the final question: the best coach in basketball right now is?
Ooh. Well, you got to go. I mean, here's the thing. You have the guys who have X's and O's, and it looks amazing, but the team isn't really great personnel-wise. So they might not finish, so the results don't look as great as the process does. But I think pound for pound, if you want to mix both process and results, you have to point to Steve Kerr. The Warriors offense, in my mind, is the most creative and clever offense I've seen in years. And remember, they weren't expected to be the number one team as they have been. I mean, they've been playing as well as any team in the league all year long consistently. And then you look at how they play defense. And, you know, an old coach said it best. They said, defense is just offense without the ball. If you're playing it right, which is it's as intricate and it moves as well as an offense does. And when you watch them play defense, it really is it's overwhelming in terms of the technique and the process and how they are able to execute so well. So I got to go with Steve Kerr, the way he just gets it as far as communication methods and the way he can find the sense of joy in playing with each other, which you know, is hard to do when you're playing a long 82-game season. So you know, he probably doesn't get enough props for that because of, you know, Steph Curry and then having KD before that. But I got to tell you, this has to be the most satisfying season he's ever had.
Coach Nick, you'll be satisfied if you check out the videos. Go to B-Ball Breakdown on Twitter as well. Thanks for joining us, sir.
Thank you.